Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the DEEPMATTER Group PLC Interim Results Presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be on listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. And I would now like to hand you over to Mark Warren, CEO of DEEPMATTER Group PLC. Good afternoon, Mark.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon or good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the DEEPMATTER Group PLC interim results. We'll be providing an update today on activities for the first half of the year, and also just cross-validating that with where we were when we conducted our placing earlier in the summer, and the progress that we've made since that time. So as a reminder to you, or for any of you who are new to us today, DEEPMATTER is a company at the forefront of digitizing chemistry. We've developed a data-rich platform technology to improve R&D productivity, primarily in the research and process chemistry space, but increasingly into broader sciences. And we do that using the platform comprising cloud-based software environment combined with Internet of Lab Things distributed throughout the laboratory environment of large corporates and smaller corporate organizations. The intention is to aggregate up data for use with machine learning and AI to improve the outcomes of scientists and better themselves in the lab. We're addressing a $28 billion market opportunity, a particular vertical within that being in research and process chemistry, to address something known as the reproducibility crisis. This is the ability for a scientist to be able to do some science and then be able to reproduce it accurately and cost effectively in the future without having to rely on hearsay and word of mouth. And I'm sure a number of you will have seen the coverage in Financial Times earlier in the year around some of the challenges of reproducibility in the life sciences industry, in particular on the back of the COVID environment. The technology that we've built enables us to identify, develop, and optimize new compounds such as pharmaceuticals, agrochemicals, and performance chemicals. And with 90 to 95% of all things being made in the chemicals sector, it's a great big and an expansive opportunity. We have a growing international footprint, and starting from last year with our first revenues, this year we're pleased to announce that we report an increase in our recognised revenues for the first half of the year, and we have an ongoing validated customer base, including pharma, biotech, contract research organisations, and scientific publishers. No investor presentation would be complete without a reference to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic at the moment. But I think it's clear that the remote sharing of scientific data to develop new medicines is a growth opportunity. And what we've seen from our sort of customer base and our user base is an increased interest in the ability to digitize their current workflows to meet the needs of the new sort of health and safety implications associated with social distancing as required on the back of the pandemic. So I guess the first place we should touch on is the financial information from the half year. Revenues of £500,000, or just over £500,000, over double what we recognised for the same period last year. This comprises provision of digital glassware to paying customers, and also income from our Infochem business, where we provide products and services. The revenues include recognition of software license renewals from last year, and so what we've got is recurring revenue base there, and that's evidenced as a result of them. We report a reduced operating loss based on last year of 1.17 million, compared with 1.62 million for the same period last year. This is completely in line with the board's expectation, and includes capitalisation of certain R&D investment, as the group prepares for implementing the digital glassware platform at scale as we move into 2021 and the launch of new functionality within our retrosynthesis product, IC-Synth, which we expect to launch in the second half of this year. We also obviously successfully raised £2 million on the 14th of July this year, supplementing the cash balance sheet that we now reported as £2 million for the first year. And this provides us with a strong and stable base, with those funds being used to invest in sales and marketing to support our long-term growth objectives, which I'll talk to in a later slide. So I mentioned that we would touch on areas of particular development since our placing in the middle of July. So we have initiated the next stage of our sales and marketing activities, and I will talk to that in one particular slide. We've progressed and extended our blue chip and other engagements that we've announced in the first half of this year. We continue to carefully manage our discretionary spend, and that's obviously increasingly important as we have some uncertainty on what might happen in the economics of the global environment in the second half of this year. We have a growing pipeline of revenues, and the impact of the COVID-19 virus on customer working practices has increased the interest that we've had in the digital glassware platform and our other products, as scientists increasingly are either working from home or need to work in a new environment, which I will talk to you a little bit later. So the first thing I want to talk about is the execution of our sales and marketing strategy. So following the placing that completed in July, we appointed a new dedicated sales lead for the group. He's gone about securing a large number of new leads through initiatives including dedicated personnel and agency deployment for collecting new leads. We've also focused our internal team on transitioning our lead breaking process right the way through to conversion into a fully fledged opportunity and closure. And that means that our technical expertise that we have within the group is focused on working with the new partners while we have new scouting activities in the early sales process. We're actively pursuing initiatives in North America and Europe, and increasingly looking at deploying probably through distributors and agents in territories such as India and China. With our strengthened sales and marketing function, we have the resources now to reach all of the global pharma in the world, and additionally biotechs, CROs, and chemistry organizations in adjacent markets. We believe we're well placed to capitalize on the current market environment, and we will continue to pursue our strategy to integrate chemistry with technology. Our ongoing response to COVID-19 is really reviewed, making sure that we put our capital resources behind areas which are consistent with growth of revenues and growth of the number of users and the growth in our core database. The board took measures early in 2020 to minimise discretionary spend, reduce overheads and protect the business during the period of uncertainty, but we saw a limited drop away in revenues, and so we were able to bring back many of those staff in the middle of the summer. The measures that we have in place have now been partially lifted, with some staff returning from Kurzarbeit and furloughed from our German and Glasgow operations, and roles to continue to support the growth of the business. So despite some COVID-related disruption in the market, mostly in the speed in which lawyers would be available to complete on contracts, the direction of travel that lab automation and digitization of laboratory environments, including chemistry, remains a clear core market for us, and our customers continue to recognize the benefits of deploying digitization tools in the improvement of productivity in their labs. I want to move on to the engagements that we disclosed in the back end of 2019 and through the first half of 2020, those continue to take shape. You'll see, and we've obviously announced our collaborations with AstraZeneca, Novartis, OTH, and Tocris from major pharma industry. We also continue to collaborate with Cancer Research UK in deploying our technology both at the Beatson Institute in Scotland, but also with their partners in China. Despite the fact that actually there was a significant reduction in lab presence throughout the university's environment during the sort of March to August period, we continue to collaborate with the University of Nottingham and the University of Leeds, and we're optimistic that we will be able to return to the academic environment as they return back to the lab environments. We also recognise the importance of partnering with large corporates to provide a more complete data solution to our customers, and so collaborations with the likes of Technology Partners and Waters continue to progress. I just want to remind you of the market opportunity which we are trying to address and demonstrate, that despite the fact that we are growing our revenues for the first time this year, we see a significant opportunity as we address increasingly large numbers of pharmaceutical companies deploying our technology with them. New molecules don't just make themselves. As the recent pandemic has shown, they're the cumulative end product emerging from an intricate process of hypothesis, design, and synthesis. It takes time, and there's inherent risk of failure in developing these molecules. If you can use much richer, higher quality data, then you have a much better chance of success. And I think what's important to realize is, take a look at an organization like Novartis that spends $9 billion a year in its research and development operations, 2.6 of which is in early stage R&D development. They progress something like 340 drug programs at any one time with 800 chemists. But we know that human interaction to produce these chemical compounds is inherently an opportunity for introducing error. 50% of that science is irreproducible, as demonstrated by the publications in Nature and so on. And that financial impact we've talked about previously, but is essentially significantly detrimental to our industry. The estimated productivity gain of 35% going digital by 2030 is something that's been argued strongly in the industry. And so we believe that our technology, if we can even just produce a 15 or 20% gain of productivity, will ultimately allow us to address a significant market and provide significant benefit, not only obviously to our customers, but ultimately through to the shareholders of DEEPMATTER. Chemical companies are increasingly making their plants interconnected and digital, and whereas probably 2 or 3 years ago we felt that we were at the emerging edge of a trend, we can now see ourselves embedded in that as a common part of thinking within our industry. So I want to outline our sort of 5-year global growth strategy for the business. The first is that we're focused absolutely on growing our user base, our data repository, and by extension our revenues. And it goes without saying that the more that we grow our user base and the more that we grow our data repository, the more opportunity we have to grow our revenues because of the value of the aggregate data that persists within those programs. Our aim is to grow to tens of thousands of users, to be the go-to repository for chemistry reproducibility data, with an opportunity to earn tens of millions of pounds worth of revenues. And we can talk to peers in the market where that's a credible proposition. We can do much of that development in terms of productivity in discovery and process chemistry. But ultimately, we can also grow our proposition by working in partnership with key opinion leaders within our sector, as well as hardware and data partners. We remain alert to merger and acquisition opportunities as appropriate. We are building long-term strategic partners, such as that with Waters, in leading hardware and software providers. And we also see an opportunity now to move towards using some of these partnerships for a global network of sales and distribution alongside our own common sales and marketing base. And finally, beyond the core proposition that we add to pharma, we see an opportunity to validate and monetize the aggregate data proposition with revenue generating deals that ultimately could lead to technology access fees, milestones, and royalties. So, sort of in summary, we think that the demand for digital glassware remains strong. The outlook for our platform is positive. Pharmaceutical and academic organisations continue to seek solutions to work remotely in this sort of strange environment that we find ourselves these days. And we really are just accelerating the lab digitisation strategies that were manifesting themselves before the COVID pandemic. Obviously, the disruption that has been brought to the market this year raises questions over what will happen in future years, but we remain cautiously optimistic in our sector in which we operate. M&A activity is increasing in pharma at the moment. That's usually a good sign that the industry is trying to move forward on the back of the disruption we saw earlier in the year. And there's many more collaborations remain in the machine learning, AI, data technology space. We're confident that we have an advanced focus on sales and will be well received as we contribute to the growth of the business. So that summarises the half-year results, and what I'd like to do now is take a moment and then we'll move over to questions that I know have been submitted over the last few days and address those one by one.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while Mark takes a few moments to review those investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you the recording of the presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. Just lastly, before I hand back to Mark, I'd like to remind you that your feedback is important. Immediately after the presentation has ended, you will be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order the company can better understand your views and expectations. Mark, thank you for the presentation. Perhaps before we look at some of those questions we've had submitted live, we did have a number of pre-submitted questions. Perhaps I could hand over to you to run through those, please.
Yeah, of course. So thanks very much. I think there was something like about 20 questions that were submitted in advance, and having reviewed them, a number covered common themes. And so what I've sought to do is try and answer them collectively so that we don't repeat ourselves over and over again. I think the first topic that I'd like to cover is on our shareholder intentions and the Nomad's involvement with the company. I think it's important to say that the focus of the company, its executive management team and its employees is on the commercial success of the business and delivering against our strategy. It's not our position to comment on the intention of our shareholders. Canaccord, our Nomad and broker, is supportive, and we don't believe there's any conflict of interest. And you'll note it's normal for AIM-listed companies to have the Nomad also as its broker. The company regularly reviews its advisors to ensure that it's getting the best possible service and value and to minimise its costs. And so I'd like to just state that I think we're confident that we're doing the right thing by way of the company at the moment. The second question, topic area that arisen was the frequency in which we release news flow, in particular RNS, but also our appearances in the press. So we use the RNS and RNS Reach system to provide updates on commercial progress that we believe is right to do so, both within our requirements as a PLC, but also respecting the commercial sensitivities that we have bound up in the agreements that we sign with our commercial partners. With regards to our increasing PR activity, our focus to date has been on securing collaborations while carefully managing our finances and resources. We're now increasingly focused on pure play sales, marketing and PR activity. And I would imagine that if you follow our social media feeds and as well as our RNS and RNS Reach and our website, that you will see more content on a routine basis over the coming months. Okay, the third topic area was the impact that COVID-19 has had on our sales and demand for digital glassware and our other products. As I described in the presentation, we are seeing increased interest from large pharma, and we are making progress in line with our expectations as a management team. But all of these discussions, as you bring a new technology into a corporate environment, take some time, not only from the point at which you secure an advocate, but all the way through the legal process and the IT security process until the point that the technology is being used routinely by an increasing number of that corporation's employees. As with all new technology, we often will go through a trial period with a new partner before the customer takes it through into wider paid deployment. We continually manage our resources in a prudent, I hope in a cost-effective manner to protect our cash position, while understanding, though, that we still need to put the capital that we have been provided with by investors and shareholders to work to drive growth of the business. With regard to our sales strategy, we use a combination of different approaches to increase the user base, to increase the use of data, and ultimately grow revenues. And that was some of the points that I tried to refer to earlier when we were talking about our growth strategy. We are always cautious in balancing our pricing against our need to distribute. So the more users and the more data we have, ultimately, the more revenues we can generate. We recognize that if we create some sort of barrier to distribution, be it price or intellectual property management, that we ultimately won't get that growth. At the same time, we still need to make, we need to recognize that people need to value our economic proposition. And so we're always cautious and considered in the commercial terms that we enter into with any one particular partner. It's also worth saying that up until the start of this year, our focus was primarily on R&D, with sales being a domain of senior management team. But what we've taken to doing since our placing is to build a dedicated sales force to support the management team. We anticipate creating at least 4 or 5 sales roles to support our next phase of growth and allow us to address North American, European, and Asian markets with a mixture of dedicated individuals and distributors. With regard to the size of the market opportunity and the timing of sales growth, we address our vertical $28 billion reproducibility crisis of chemistry. We're focused on the use of digital technology to disrupt the sector. The industry accepts that our technology will ultimately result in us being more productive, and it's driving our strategy over the next 12 to 24 months. The fourth area of questioning really seemed to focus on whether we've been approached by any other companies, presumably in terms of M&A or strategic investment. With regards to whether we've been approached by another company, as with most public companies or indeed any business, informal discussions are routinely taking place, but no offers have been progressed to the point of being of merit to put to shareholders at this stage. And I can confirm that right now the company is not in any active discussions that merit more comment. Finally, our thoughts on market competition and where we believe we are positioned in the market. So this is a huge market with rooms for a number of different types of solution, each of which with their appropriate use and target market. But we do believe that we are at the forefront of digitizing chemistry. We encounter competition from some larger corporates and SMEs for certain elements of what we do, but our aggregate offering, the digital glassware, is distinct. No other data collection platform in the market that does what we do or the way that we provide it. And so we believe that we have competitive advantage and at the forefront of our field in that regard. So I think that answers the pre-submitted questions. And now we'll do is just take a second and we'll come to any questions that have been submitted during the session today.
That's great. Thank you, Mark.
So let's probably start with questions. There's a question about whether cloud is being used for the data and client setup. And so the digital glassware platform is a cloud-based platform. And so, I think what we know is that historically, pharmaceutical industry was sensitive to the use of cloud-based environment, but it increasingly accepted for both clinical data and for small molecule data. And so, yes, our platform is cloud-based. We do have optionality to do local installations for clients that specifically want it, but we see the value in the sharing of data through the cloud as an important differentiator for the digital glassware platform. There's a question around the translation of interest from pharma companies into sales, and I think it's worth saying that we do sell to pharmaceutical companies as well as get sort of, I guess, trial interest. And maybe I'll refer back to what I described previously, where we found that it's quite often important in introducing a new technology into a laboratory environment to do a trial period where we seek to understand the workflow processes of the scientists and the workflow of the laboratory before that becomes a fully paid for program. But as I've described previously, like our partnerships with large pharma, we move from trial to wider scale deployment and ultimately on to paid sales. There's a question around the 6-month goals. So I think we'll just we'll restate those as we described, really as a correlate to the 5-year goals of the business. So we are focused on growing our user base. We are focused on growing the size of our data repository that correlates with that user base, and ultimately the revenues that derive from that. We will also be focused on ensuring that we have the right strategic partnerships in place, both to provide aggregate data to our pharma partners and customers, as well as the opportunity to extend our reach in terms of sales and marketing and distribution. And then finally, we still interrogate the aggregate data that we own insights to identify value that can be monetized indirectly through other offerings, be it in robotics or in sort of understanding the behavioral patterns of chemists, for example. So there's a question here about continuous manufacturing in the sector. So we see digital glassware falling very clearly into the application of research and process chemistry. And ultimately, that could feed through into optimized manufacturing, but we're bridging the development of new molecules through that research and process chemistry space. But I think that what we see more and more is that process, manufacturing environment is increasingly autonomous. It has increasing amounts of robotics, and the quality of data that feeds into those processes is key, and that's where digital glassware ultimately adds real value. Well, there's a question here about will sales be going after the likes of Solvay and DuPont? So I think I described at the beginning of the presentation that we would have a primary focus in terms of life sciences and agrochemicals, but actually increasingly we can see the application of the technology in areas like performance chemicals. So you can imagine there are other providers of small molecule compounds that are not in the life sciences sector. And I think it's right to say that the technology has application in space. It is an additional sales and marketing stream, and that requires those resources to be placed behind those. So we have to balance the amount of time we spend with pharmaceutical companies against other organizations, but it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect us to be exploring stuff outside of the life sciences sector. And there's a question about DEEPMATTER working with pharmaceutical companies in regard to COVID-19 vaccines. So I just want to say here, we engage with large pharmaceutical companies to deploy our technology to allow them to produce compounds which are more cost effective and can be developed more quickly and more cheaply. How the pharmaceutical companies choose to use their technology is up to them. So whether they want to use it on some small molecule program, whether they want to use it on some sort of different biological compound is really up to them. And it's not something that we would disclose to the market unless that partner felt that it was appropriate for us to do so. Those confidentiality terms are usually sufficiently tight that we wouldn't be able to disclose which areas that we work within. So I think that probably covers most of the topics that I think we're able to talk to on this occasion. And so I'm going to wrap up the Q&A there.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for addressing those questions. Just to remind investors that all the questions submitted today will be reviewed by the company and published back onto the Investor Meet Company platform where appropriate to do so. Mark, perhaps I could just ask you just to wrap up and conclude before I direct investors for feedback.
Yeah, so I think thanks very much for that. So I think it's obviously been great for us to see ourselves grow our revenues in the first half of this year. We're optimistic on the opportunity for next year. We remain cautiously optimistic around the sector as a whole, and we look forward to being able to update the market on further digital glassware deployments and progress against our core goals over the coming months.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for updating investors today. Could I ask investors not to close this session, as you will be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback. If you accessed the meeting from our website, the feedback page will appear in front of you. If you accessed it from the link in the email, you'll be asked to log in to submit your feedback. So on behalf of DEEPMATTER Group PLC and Investor Meet Company, thank you very much for attending today's session. That concludes today's session. Thank you and good afternoon.